Welcome to Mayshad Choice Women in Money. Welcome to Mayshad Women. Oh my gosh. Welcome to Mayshad Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, our series. See, this is what happens when we have a Memorial Day holiday and it throws up my entire schedule for the entire week. I'm so excited to be hosting you today. I'm Jan Richard-Doms, the Vice President of Development with Mayshad Choice. As you know, we are an ecosystem of brands for women by women, connecting professional women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. We're thrilled to be hosting two incredibly accomplished women who have incredible experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Jodi Brockington, welcome. And Susan Robinson, welcome.
Hey, thanks.
Please, everyone, follow us. Join Mayshad.com for all of our upcoming programming. As you know, we kick off each and every week with Dr. Risa Reiger, our clinical psychologist and investor who helps us up the week for success. Followed every Tuesday with our the Equity and Inclusion series. We host now 2 workshops on Workshop Wednesdays, followed by our Women in Money series on Thursday mornings as well. And we invite all of you to learn more about our new membership that we launched in the digital world for how you too can stay engaged with an incredibly diverse ecosystem of highly accomplished women, diverse across industries, job functions, company types, and really interesting professional and personal experiences. Would love for you to join our membership, and you can learn more about that and join Mayshad.com as well. And please make sure to type in all of your questions for our show today. We can't wait for our Q&A section. Welcome, everyone. Jodi Brockington is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion and Sourcing and Corporate Social Responsibility for the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. She'll tell us more about what's happening right now in her workspace related to all things related to moving above and beyond COVID-19 and what comes next. And welcome to Susan Robinson. Susan is a public speaker, business advisor, facilitator, and she was a former CEO of the Global Health Aspiration and TED resident, as we know, TED Talks. Welcome, Susan.
Thanks.
So excited to host both of you. So at Mayshad, we talk a lot about identity and how gender isn't a binary construct. And so when we think about gender, we think through it through the lens of the professional and personal experiences we all bring to the table as it shaped how we become so then passionately involved in our careers. And we'd love for both of you to share more about your stories as well, in the sense of how you've come to the DEI space. And it's such an incredible conversation because both of you have really diverse industries across fintech and financial services, philanthropy, healthcare, global health. And so it's welcome. Honored to have you both with us today. Jodi, I'll let you go first.
Okay, I was going to say, I feel like I've been in the D&I space since birth is always my joke. I am biracial and have lived bi-coastally, and I always joke that my bi stopped there. But being born and raised in New York, I think just symbolizing not only for my family, but also for the community growing up here on the Upper West Side, really set the precedence of what I thought the world should be like. A little bit of everyone. Never really had any friends until I think maybe 2nd grade, where I found out that someone had 2 parents that were of the same race. Like, even if they were the same race, I didn't see them that way. They could have been Jewish, both Jewish, but one had red hair and one had brown hair. So they were already different. But when I met my one friend, parents, that they were both Black. And I came home and I told my mom, I'm like, Janetta has 2 Black parents. And they didn't, my mom didn't know what to say, right? Where everyone else was kind of a mix. So I always joke, you never have to guess who's coming to dinner at my house. And I feel like it's that kind of openness that people will prove themselves to just be good or bad. And I will decide if I want to interact with them or not, as a child, play with them or not, or fight for them. I was destined to be a lawyer because I always fought for everyone to have equal time on the playground and all of that. Even started law school, and that just was not my calling. So I think for me, the reason the D&I space has stuck, if you look for a transferable skill, always trying to be that different person in the room, or knowing that I might be the only one, but I'm going to show up for that other only person who might show up. Or when it was a program, when I was at UCLA, they did UCLA Unicamp, which was mostly for Black and brown young kids growing up in the inner cities, and all of the UCLA students would volunteer a week in their summer. But most of the college kids were white and Asian, which is fine. And they were donating their time. But I wanted them to know that there were Black kids that also went to UCLA who were older, and for them to have some role models, and kind of made people come up to the camp from our athletes and fraternities and all of that. So always trying to bring a community together for people to feel better or amongst themselves, but always playing the role of being that one piece that was different. I'm okay and comfortable with being uncomfortable, being the only woman in the room, being the only Black person in the room, at one point being the only person under 40 in the room. Now I'm under 50 in the room, right? So those things change, but it's still a diverse point, right? So I think for me, it's just my life's work. And no matter what I've been in, no matter what sector, nonprofit, for-profit, school teacher, all that stuff has made me understand it better, from an efficacy model all the way to all the intersectionalities. When we talk about women, often, McKinsey just did that huge report, Women in the Workplace, and they really talk about white women, which is cool. And when they add those intersectionalities, disabilities, color, race, religion, the inequities just are so apparent. And if I can show up and fill in a spot or help someone else fill in more of those space, the gaps, it's just my work, life, and mission. It's what I breathe every day.
Thank you, Jodi. That's beautiful. And I think that, as we think now about kind of the complexities that are surfacing from COVID, right? And we think about, how companies are really trying to create a deeper level of culture, and will continue to do so in the sense of just how they create new normals for themselves. Your experience and just your perspective on things, I think, is very valuable to lend itself to some really valuable insights, and really helping companies think through, so what comes next. And Jodi, you and I were having a conversation before this around just, what does even crisis management look like now, right? And the disconnects and the disparities, just in the sense of really truly, as we move forward, what is a crisis versus what becomes more of a standard operating procedure, even if it's a new standard operating procedure, right? And what do we normalize? But we'll talk a bit more in the show around just about the flexibility that's required now in this period of time to think outside the box. But such an interesting and very rewarding background. Excited to get more of your insights too as we continue through the show. Thank you for being here. Susan, love for you to tell your story.
Sure. So I think, like Jodi, just coming from a place of people are sort of good or bad, and you get along or you don't. And I grew up the same way, having that philosophy. And I entered college as a biology major with the intention on being an orthopedic surgeon. But as I went through my first 2 years, I kept saying to my mom, I can't get all the notes before the professor moves on. I can't finish tests. Like, something's going on. I need my glasses changed. So I've worn glasses or contacts, glasses since the age of 8, contacts since the age of 16. And I had that experience of going to the ophthalmologist once a year, getting the lenses changed, and the world was clear again. And I was looking for that experience, and it just wasn't happening. And ultimately, during the spring semester of my sophomore year in college, I was diagnosed with a genetic vision impairment that has no correction or cure. And I'm now legally blind, or what's defined as legally blind. I prefer partially sighted because it's a little bit more optimistic, but if we stick with the American language, that's what it is. And so I remember sitting in a retina specialist office, and he said, you're going to have to think about a career, because a surgical career isn't a realistic one anymore. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, if I can't operate in a hospital, then I'll just operate the entire hospital. And I changed my major to health policy and administration, and sort of have gone about my way. For most of my career, though, my vision impairment was dealt with sort of like people on crutches. There's just a little something extra that you have to do. You have to hold the door for someone who has crutches. It's a little challenging for them to get through the door themselves. So if I was the most senior person at a table, someone on my staff would calculate the tax and tip for dinner, put a big X where I would sign it, and then I would just sign it. They would let me know who's walking down the hallway, or give me just the landscape of who's who at a table, because I've got, thankfully, a pretty good memory, because I can't recognize faces. And in certain environments, people are dressed very similarly, and it's hard to tell people apart when you see the world like an impressionist painting, like I do. And it was about 4 years ago, give or take, where someone started calling me disabled for the first time in my life. And I sat back and I'm like, okay, no professor, no clinician, no individual from initially the Pennsylvania Commission for the Blind, now the New York State Commission for the Blind. No one ever used that word before. And so where was this really coming from? And the person who was, I'm going to call it name calling, was pretty relentless about it, despite my compare contrasts of our personal and professional accomplishments. And it was a really interesting conversation. And over dinner so that conversation went on for quite some time. And over dinner with a friend who, poor thing, was in the wrong place at the wrong time, she said, "How are you?" And I had just been fed up with this whole disabled dialogue. And I went on a tear, and the tear ended with, "You want to call me disabled? I'll tell you what, I fail at being disabled." And the words just sort of came. I had never thought about it before. It just came out of a place of great frustration, and combined with the lack of logic that is applied to that word. And so I've had the opportunity, as you mentioned, with my TED Talk and even in a global scale at the UN, to talk about this word that from a policy point of view makes really good sense. If we didn't have the Americans with Disabilities Act or similar policies in different countries around the world, there wouldn't be doorways wide enough to fit a wheelchair or cutouts in sidewalks for people who don't ambulate very well to transport themselves from point A to point B. There wouldn't be a large print menu at a restaurant for me to be able to read. There wouldn't be a sign language interpreter on Governor Cuomo's daily news briefs, so people who are deaf or hard of hearing would be able to understand what he's communicating. But the word disabled in the English language means diametrically opposed things. It means to take something that's working perfectly fine and deliberately interrupting it so that it doesn't function, like a disabled alarm. It also means that's completely broken down and not capable of functioning for what it's been designed to do, like a disabled vehicle. So when the word is used to describe a person, what really does that mean? And having been a department head, an organizational leader, and someone who's hired and unfortunately fired people, I have come to learn that not everybody has it all. So I sit back and start to wonder, why is my not 2020 vision such an issue when even the so-called normal don't have it all going on all the time, no skill, perfectly honed to a perfect point for every situation of every day? And how can we begin to recognize talent regardless of packaging in order to really bring out the best talents and strengths that we all have, apply them where they're most needed to get the best outcome that both individuals and businesses want to have?
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for sharing your story too.
Yeah,
it's, I think it's interesting because what I'm hearing, in terms of Susan, what you said, and Jodi, what you said as well, and in the sense of your background now, and I imagine that this is a moment in time where, and Jodi, this is something that we had talked about before the show too, just the theme of resiliency keeps coming up in the sense of, how companies are now envisioning what the new normal becomes. And, you both have been tremendously resilient and adaptable and flexible. And let's, segue into now, how have your personal experiences and your own complex web of how you identify and the different roles with which you identify factored into now how you envision leading in the work that you do? Jodi, we'll start with you and then go to Susan.
Oof. Well, I was, I think in the corporate sector, and I am too, by heart, soul, am an entrepreneur too. So this is always difficult. So I have people coming to me on the entrepreneur side who I'm helping small businesses stay intact, stay alive, add them on to things like what else could they participate in? Just like a nonprofit, you don't want to suddenly change what you do just to get the grant, right? So you still want to stay in your lane, but you got to build that lane differently. And I was saying how it was to my advantage that I've been doing virtual events before they were popular, right? Where you only get 10 people and you're like, woohoo. Like, social media back in the day was the best fax machine you had, who had the most numbers, right? And now it's how many likes, how many people follow you on YouTube and on Facebook and on, right? So I think for us in the corporate space, the diversity and inclusion, or my department is DTMA, which is the Diverse Talent Management and Advancement. So it cuts across our entire company, has become like the heart and soul of the culture of our company, because it's so important to our CEO, this whole diversity piece, that our team took the forefront of really keeping people connected and bringing people together. We even started, and I was so excited to hear your story, our latest ERG, Employee Resource Group, which is We Thrive, which is focused on disabilities, those that are visible and invisible, right? So if someone was to look at you, they would not think anything was wrong with you. Like, oh, vision, right? We don't know if someone has cancer. We don't know. We even include caregivers in this group, because even though you might not be the one who has the disability, quote unquote, that you are also making an ability for someone else. And we need to, as a company, embrace that. So I was really excited. We had Deb Daggett kick that off for us. I'm sure you're familiar, who's also a D&I specialist. So for us, it's become such a main thing that all of our ERG leaders and groups all were responsible one Monday, we called them Meetup Mondays, to talk about different topics that either affected that group specifically or just as a topic. So it was resiliency, how to deal with people at home, being in the virtual space, all the stuff that was coming up that we knew everyone was going to have to deal with. We've now moved forward into more subject matter experts and people from the outside, but that still reflect those groups. So we had Deb Daggett kick off that whole series, and we've had Dr. Corey Hebert, who's a doctor of the people, Black male doctor who's a surgeon and everything, still performing surgeries, but through COVID, but has been talking about all the health inequities and disparities. He prefers inequities between communities of color and those on the outskirts. So it would include also Latinos, disabled, women, and how COVID has just blown it up for more people to see what has been going on for years. So this whole I can't go to the doctor just for my toothache, just for this, all these, that everyone has been stopped. So what is that doing, and how is that impacting money making? Who's on the front line? So watching that, even within our own company, there's different issues that different people are facing, and we're trying our best, but we are not the answer for everything. We're happy that we had instilled enough diversity and inclusion trainings and people to be more sensitive, but we can't solve the problem for every parent who can't, homeschool their kid, or you don't get along with your wife or husband, or the dog's driving you crazy. There's not an ERG for that. There is services, there's like call your mom, call your best friend, call your work wife, call your work husband, call somebody, but we can't solve it all. So I feel like we became like the center for everything. I think we were working like 40 hours on top of 40 hours. Like there was never a stopping moment, and it's still kind of going now. I appreciate that because it keeps you busy, right? But then like, when do I breathe? So I think, it's being there at the right time and really listening, knowing that everyone does not want to, as much as they want their voice to be heard, they don't always want to be the voice. So when issues and matters come up, that our company, part of my draw to that, to working at DTCC after having my own business for 20 years, was the fact that it was small. And I said I didn't want to go to a very large company where diversity and inclusion just seemed like a thing to do versus the culture. And here it's really, DTCC is what I was telling Jan, was really more of a community than a company. And that people are really, we have our own intranet where, all the top leaders are also reporting back, like what's going on in Tampa, what's going on in the UK, what's going on. We're taking pictures of our own team happy hours and, finding some downtime in that. We did our CSR in terms of like, the give back. We have an additional matching grant of $500 for each of our employees to give to any COVID related organization that they would personally like to respond to, since they are still working and can do so. We're also doing volunteer. So if you don't want to do the money, there's virtual volunteer things you can do. There's live things depending on where you live. And also just the idea of, fun things. We did something for Earth Day because that's still part of our environmentally conscious part of our company. So trying to keep, and I think it's actually getting more people better connected, and definitely meeting people worldwide that maybe you don't get to take a flight to our UK office or to Chennai or to Singapore, but now you actually got to meet them because I get to see them virtually. So there's the good, the bad, and the ugly of this, we must stay at home. And for me, it's the ugly is staying home. Like, I'm used to traveling, so I don't mind not seeing people and just checking in. And I feel like people may be checking in a little bit too much at this point, but sometimes they're like, yeah, I'm here. And they feel sorry for me because I'm one of the few single on my team. I'm the only person who does not either live with someone or is not married or with a significant other. So they're always like, oh, I wonder how those single people are. And I'm like, hey, I'm here. Like, I'm here. We're good. Because I don't have to hear about the cat, the dog, the grandkid, the kid, the husband, or the wife, right?
No, Jodi,
but I think it's great.
What you're saying is so fascinating, and I think so spot on with so many of the conversations we've been having with the Meisha talks as well, is that the notion of community versus company, and how companies are creating different opportunities for people to really feel a part of something. And a woman that I was speaking with the other day, they actually do virtual happy hours for significant others and spouses of employees, so that they can also create a sense, because we're now really living and working under one roof, and that's not going to go away anytime soon, even as we quote unquote go back to work, right? So this notion of community, I think, is fascinating. And then also on the flip side of that, what you said around, we can't have an employee resource group for everything, right? And so simultaneously, how are companies expanding their notion and their definition of inclusion, but yet not diluting it to the point that it doesn't really mean anything, right? And how are companies continuing to break down some of the silos that they maybe have experienced in the past, particularly now because engagement at all different levels is so incredibly important as we go forward into whatever it means when we go quote unquote back to work, right? Susan, so I would love for you to tell the story of what your dad said to you at one point when he said to you, when I give you a book, but you tear up all the pages if I did.
Yeah.
Share with us that, because I think there's so much inspiration just about who I know you are. And that I love that quote.
Thanks. Yeah. My dad has such a way, he just he tilts his head, and it's connected to so many things that to me just weren't such a big deal. And then I could see his posture, his shoulders kind of come forward, he tilts his head and shakes, I give you the book and you tear out the pages. It's one of those kinds of things, not a compliment when you're a kid, but I think that it kind of speaks to how you can create your own playbook, how circumstances may challenge you to really, I'm not a big fan of the phrase think outside the box, but since it's a common one, I think it certainly applies in the times that we're in now. But as we talked about before, I think being a person with a vision impairment, there's an issue of safety and security, personal safety and security, that I'm always looking to maintain. And so if I see a dark spot on a sidewalk, for example, I'll initially just see the color variation. And then I'm always in diagnostic mode. Is it a chunk of sidewalk missing? Is it a wet spot? Is it ice? Is it slippery? Is it something that I could trip and fall or slip on? Is it something that maybe is some substance I'm not aware of? So ultimately, my choice is just to walk around it, and whatever I need to do to make that happen, I will. But I'm constantly thinking about what could it be in order for my own safety and security, I guess. And so, and it actually just recently happened. There was a newly paved sidewalk, and there was quite a thick stick on it. So it wasn't a huge branch, but it was a thick enough stick that I could see it from a slight distance. And I knew that the pavement was too new to have a crack in it. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, gosh, I really always am in diagnostic mode, figuring out what it could be. So if it's summertime and I saw the dark spot on the sidewalk, it's clearly not ice. But if it's wintertime, it could be ice, or it could be a new wet spot. It could be tar, it could be anything. And so in a spirit of, you get new circumstances, even if the rug is pulled out from underneath you in a quite traumatic kind of way, how can you just constantly adjust, retool, figure out what you have available, what additional things you may or may need that you may or may not be able to get your hands on, and how do you be able to move forward to pursue whatever you're pursuing? So how do you create a work environment at home that works for everybody? How can you compromise and think creatively? And again, in that give you the book and you tear out the pages, what used to be one of those, you didn't do what I wanted you to do the way I wanted you to do it, kind of anti-compliments. It really has become something that my clients and even myself, going through everything that we all are having a shared experience with, how do we figure out how to navigate really uncharted waters? There is no playbook, so how do we figure it out? And there is just nothing that we can necessarily rely on. So can we just create some lines in the sand and figure out how to work within them? And when the sand shifts, how do we draw new lines in the sand and figure out how to work within those as well? I think it's both personal and professional. I think it's individual, group, organization, company. I think that concept of what I always knew was a funny way of just saying, oh, like, you're my kid and I love you, but could you just be a little easier about this, has really turned into quite an asset to help figure out, for businesses, COVID aside, how do we grow from 100 million to 140 million in 3 years? Or with COVID, how do we take something that's turned upside down and really make it hopeful, joyful, if that's possible? Or how do we just survive day to day or minute to minute, depending on, what we're all individually going through? So I think the opportunity that I had to sort of unpack that with my dad over the years, but also having this extra layer of always being in diagnostic mode, always trying to figure out creatively, what am I experiencing that I can't see, in order to make sure that I'm safe and secure as a human, all put together has really positioned me to help others, particularly in business, think through complex or unusual business problems. And even in COVID, how do we think through what's important? When it comes to COVID, the world shifted online. But for people who are blind, if your website isn't accessible, that's not a solution. So how do you do that? Or if you're a person with MS who always used Instacart to have your essentials delivered to you, and now you can't get a slot because all of the so-called normal is now doing the same thing as you are, how do you do that? Or if you're a person who has no use of their arms, how do you toggle through a website that might work for someone who has a vision impairment but doesn't work for you? And so this constant need of how do we figure out our circumstances and adjust to them? I think the so-called normal world is getting a really good, you've been thrown into the deep end of the pool on Give You the Book and You Tear Out the Pages, where those of us who can't accept, not can't accept, we accept it, it is what it is, but who the so-called normal construct on a day-to-day basis doesn't work for us, we've always figured out workarounds, because that's what we have to do in order to accomplish whatever we want to accomplish on a day-to-day basis. And so the so-called normal world is sort of coming into our space, and it's like, hey, we've got some tools that we can share with you to help everyone figure out how do we get from day to day and get to the other side of this whole thing and get back to, maybe not get back to, create the new normal, create the playbook now for whatever we want it to be. By the time a vaccine comes, a treatment comes, herd immunity takes over, whatever the end result of this is going to be. But how can we pace ourselves through this to be successful and thriving by the time we get to the other side of it?
It's interesting because we all use very different language to describe what the future is. Right, like in the beginning, a lot of us would refer to it as when we go back, or when we go back to normal, or when we can go back outside and we go back to work. And But I think that there's also, and Susan, this is like, as I'm listening to you, your response, thinking through, okay, so we're not going back to whatever it was, right? And on many levels, whatever it was wasn't working. When we think about kind of the interlocking nature of everything from race, class, gender, to climate change and sustainability, to supply chain, which I know, Jodi, you can talk extensively about that as well, just in the sense of how all of the ecosystems that make up humanity work and weren't working together for so many different reasons. And I think that even when we drop the language of going back, then it creates a whole different sense of possibility and a whole different sense of liberation and freedom around being a part of what comes next rather than waiting for that to come to us. I'm interested in your perspectives on that, because you both have worked with and consulted with huge companies and organizations to very nimble, agile startups and everything in between. So you've seen and experienced a lot in the sense of, what works and what doesn't work in moments of transformational change. And particularly now that we're in another one of those, which is this is probably the one time for us Gen Xers and baby boomers that we've never experienced anything like this, right? I want to talk about, the next generation coming up as well, but, in the sense of what is it going to take from your perspectives for people who are currently leaders to be able to rise above and create a new sense of joy, to your point of experiencing joy. Like, how can we do that as leaders within a company setting to ensure that our employees are experiencing fulfillment, joy, and are being a part and are invited to be a part and sit at that table in the sense of what that new creation looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that there will be an evening of the playing field, or in this case, with your term, some more invitations for people who might not have been invited before, but also with the inclusive part of not only being invited, but actually being heard, because you have to now. Because, all of the leaders have been wrong so far, right, on one thing or another, that we can all be wrong now, right? We don't all have to do something, right? We can, but we do need to listen better. And I think there's more voices of inclusion. And that's actually one of the names of one of the series. That's what we're calling it. Our series now is Voices of Inclusion. But I feel like because of everything that's going on, that more people are open, and the people are open to hearing and listening and for more ideas. But then there's that other group that becomes more fearful and can't hear, won't hear, just like the last recession. It's like, your job is not coming back. So you now need to figure out what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and, as you said, tear up the paper, Susan, right? So that kind of space. So I think that there's more room for that, and the people who have bigger ears, bigger hearts, bigger vision are going to be better at taking a twist and a turn and still staying on course, or being okay with saying, like, I was about to go right, but I'm being told left, and I'm just going to have to suck it up. A good investment, a good change of, you saw all those smaller companies that started making masks, right? We're going to need them, right? So let's make something we need. I have the material for it. You don't have the material. We can't order that. So people, I'm hoping for more collaboration, more insightfulness, different voices, because I can honestly say, I don't really feel like any group right now has a true leader, no matter size, color, shape, country, community, boat, doesn't matter. I feel like we're just all at a restart, that I hope that we just find good leaders and not care where they're coming from, but they're gonna, and some people are rising to the occasion. Like, you didn't expect people to speak about this or that. I even joked recently that they have this really good, and I'm surprised, MTA survey that's asking you about public transportation and why you take it and where you take it, what lines you like. I didn't expect that much depth. I thought it was going to be like a 2-minute survey. Do you take it? Yes, no, period. Right. But it was a good 20 minutes if you were taking some time and really giving some feedback. So I'm using that as an example where people who actually do that regularly and need to do it regularly will do it. And you see a lot of it, especially in the entrepreneur community and small business, like, these loans, and you have to read your way through it. And, there's always a solution for someone to give you some money if you're going to get taxed on it on the other side, or someone's going to make a profit on it. But are you really giving it? And I'm really concerned, and not concerned, but I haven't heard enough from the foundation world or the nonprofit world enough. Like, I feel like that's a voice that has not spoken a lot on a lot of these things and could possibly have some of the better solutions. So I don't know if they're just sitting back and waiting, or if there's going to be that's going to be part of the evening of this playing field, which I'm hoping for, that it will have a shift.
Yeah. A couple of things you just said are really very striking to me around, you use the word heart and leadership from a heartfelt perspective. And that's not something we typically have heard in the past, in the sense of, what does it mean to be a really effective, innovative leader? And I'm wondering, in this moment in time too, will we see, some of those more relational aspects of one's personality really become even more valuable? And those are often things that we think about as a very feminine approach, right? We think of like masculine traits versus feminine traits. And if you're leading from your heart, you're leading from your intuition, you're leading from your soul, those are things that necessarily, at least in American culture, haven't been valued in the past, is what I think they will be now, for a lot of different reasons, right? And I think I really appreciate what you said just around, what does it take to be really truly a holistic leader as one relates to each other at a human level.
Well, I just think now it's that opportunity, just because we are all experiencing the same thing at the same time. No matter how we're dealing with it, or what you have that someone else doesn't have, doesn't matter. There's someone who's passed away. There's someone who's lost a job. There's someone who's at the front line. There's someone who's in a hospital, a nursing home, or this or that. And so, and it's in your face every day, and it's everybody. It's not like, oh, those people over there only. So that's where the heart part for me comes in, where I can understand, like, hypothetically understand you better, because we're all experiencing this now. So from this place, let's all start to move forward together, and let me learn what you did in this country. Let me learn what you did as a woman. Let me learn what you did as someone who's disabled. And if what you did worked for you, let me try it. It still might not work for me yet. I might need some of the disabled situation, and I might need some of the pride situation, but I'm going to take whatever I can now. People are more willing to try stuff than ever before. So,
we talk a lot about space right now, and space, at least to us New Yorkers in the past, has meant physical space. Like, where, what part of the city do you work in? What's your commute like? How do you get from point A to point B to point C, back to point A at the end of the evening? And as we know, in this moment in time, with the world of remote work, like the whole notion and concept of space has changed quite a bit. And as we think forward into the future around what does re-envisioning of space look like, will that take on a different concept and a different meaning as companies think about, like, how do you create an inclusive culture? Susan, let's start with you, and then we'll move to Jodi.
Yeah, I think the space thing is a really interesting one. It's so tangible. And as I'm having discussions with a variety of different clients and people and executive leaders, how they're expressing it is really kind of interesting. So if you're taking an institution of higher education with residential students, and you're taking a 2-person dorm room and making it a 1-person dorm room, you've effectively cut your residential students by 50%, or maybe even a little bit more, because I think some dorm rooms hold even 3 or 4 students, or even more. I know a couple. I don't know all of them. And how do you take a lecture hall that in pre-COVID times fits 190 people, and now with the assistance of physical plant and property and all of their measuring tapes, you realize that same space now is appropriate for 29. When you're trying to figure out diversity of participation in higher education, how do you do some things in person? How do you manage space in and out of a building when class time change is all at the same time, and you have even a reduced number of students per room, now in a more dense, smaller space like a hallway or a foyer or just in and out of an entrance building. Some of those things certainly apply to public transportation as well. So I think in the workspace, it's no different. I have a pal who's a research scientist, and there used to be in her lab 6 people that could be at one bay. And when you're working with a scientist partner where you're maybe doing a project that needs 3 arms all at the same time, your efficiency of a project now gets stretched over a longer period of time. So I think businesses are going to start to look at productivity and space as they relate to each other. I think they're also taking a really deep dive, as I've heard some execs talk about. Through this process, we've learned what jobs actually can be done from home versus jobs that actually need to have a physical space on property. That creates the cultural issue that we were talking about before. How do you maintain connectivity? How do you maintain team and communication and culture? But how do we do all of those things in a new world where space has now become a much greater and weightier consideration than it ever has before? I mean, space has always been, oh gosh, we need more space. We're just going to cram one more person and everyone needs to work in a smaller physical space. But now, and especially in New York City apartments, how do you take your entire cubicle and set it up in your 450 square foot studio apartment? What are the responsibilities for that? How do we make sure that people are productive? And I think that businesses now have learned that productivity is there. But how do we transition back to fulfilling mission, whether that's for profit or not for profit? How do we deliver? And how do we do that while we keep all of our products, services, and mostly important, our people safe and healthy? I think we're going to learn a lot more as we get back to whatever that means. And I think I think there's also going to be a lot of trial and error. So I know in the research space, there are some things that have come back in the past week or so, and things were shut down very, very quickly, understandably so. And as things come back up under a new normal, how can we get the same amount of work done? So an 8-hour day does that become an 11-hour day because I have to walk away from my bench in order for my colleague to do his or her part. That colleague then walks back away. I move back. I think we're going to learn a lot, and all of those pieces need to be factored into whatever is kind of the right next step as we emerge into the next phase of all of this.
And I think it also is going to require, particularly from a leadership perspective, again, honing in on those emotional intelligence skills around developing more empathy for people, having more patience in the workplace, and understanding that we're all going to come to it from very different perspectives, and knowing that change is hard on a good day, right? And now we're faced with so much change within a short period of time.
Yeah, and how interesting that up until this, sort of the mantra in the business place was, how do we do more with less? And now, really, how do we do more with more? I now have 6 feet diameter around me, and I don't necessarily like it because I'm a human and I'm used to my colleague being right next to me. How do you do, I mean, I think with PPEs and in the OR, it's a little bit different. But if you think about how would you maintain social distance while doing a hip replacement? How do you do that? So I think we're different sectors are going to apply different thought processes and strategies relative to the success of their individual businesses. And I think there will be some transferable learnings and skills that get developed, but we're in for a really interesting, what do they call, on-ramp of learning as we move forward.
Thank you, Susan. Jodi, we'll turn to you.
No, I was going to say too, just the thought of how to get to work. It's one thing since we have offices in different cities, right? So in Tampa and Boston and Dallas, most people drive to their office. So, we had enough parking, maybe not, because maybe more people were being dropped off or who knows, but at least they were coming to work individually or maybe a couple at a time, right? So that seems like it might be easier to do. That we also closed those offices stayed open a little longer because of the same situation. But, as thinking while doing that survey, I was like, oh, I've been on the bus a couple of times. I went to eye doctor, Susan. I did go to the eye doctor. I was concerned about my vision, and unfortunately, it was worse. But the idea of I ended up taking the bus because on the way home I had to wear my glasses and the sun. I didn't have sunglasses on, right? So partially being disabled or enabled at the moment, but just the idea. Eventually, on a bus, I felt like there weren't any numbers that said, "Oh, you can have 20 people on the bus," or when all the pink seats are gone, then no one can get on, right? There was no real rules. So everyone's looking around and, so you come on next, Susan, and I'm like, well, there's really not enough space, I think, for me, right? For you to sit that close or on any of the seats near me. So it's going to be semi-individual, but semi-given. So how do you phase people back? And we had, maybe, as we talk about going back or moving forward, I think we need to move forward out of this open, like as much as we talk about we need space, I've never been a fan of these open seating, no offices things in general, because they make me less productive. Hence why I'm much better not being in the office, because then those time meters. Hey, Jodi, I need you for this. Oh, Jodi, can you help with this? Oh, Jodi, now I get it via text and, IM and Skype Messenger, right? But at the same time, I can still turn it off. In that open space, if you don't have this sense of community, and I don't know how many showers you take and how often you clean your hands, but we've all been to the bathroom. We've all seen someone wash their hands. I mean, all of that kind of stuff that happened before this, right? Where are we going to eat? My company, at least in our New York office or Jersey office, we don't have an actual cafeteria. So who's going to control if you're going to eat? Are you going to be at work long enough to have a meal, need a drink? If you can't have a sip or eat something on a flight, and that's only a couple hours if you're going to be at work first, so how, there's more than just that physical space. And so it's all those layers. And now if people's kids are not going back to school and they're also doing school from home for a little longer, and, there's so many layers that I'm actually excited and intrigued to see what's going to happen. I'm happy that I'm still able to do what I do without having to be in a particular place, although I'd like to be someplace hot, sunny with a pool somewhere. But the idea of you have to just be open, and people need to pace themselves a little bit better. And I think if we were thinking less of going back to what was or business as usual, right? BAU, all these lovely new acronyms. My favorites are the airport, stations that we have in our house now. Are you going from the LVM, your living room, to the BDM, to your bedroom, to the KIT, to the kitchen? That's like the travel plans we have right now. So, when those can shift a little, where people are really thinking a little bit more logically, my family lives far away, so outside of the country and all that. When will I see them? Although where they're living, things seem to be going back a little bit more where they are, opening up a few more things. And then you look at other places that are opening up and they're not doing so well. So just watching this, it's almost like we're in it, but I also feel sometimes like I'm having an out of body experience and I'm watching it from above and floating.
Yes.
What did Susan do? That seemed to work, but it's not working for me.
That's a really good point though, Jodi, because what works today, whether it's for me, it works today,
right?
It might not work tomorrow. And so I think in the business sense, we're trying to figure out a construct that we can all set up and adhere to, while at the same time acknowledging that as individuals, any given day can be very, very different.
Right. And what's essential to someone is not as what's essential to me is I'd like to get my hair done. I would like to get my nails done. There's certain things as a woman that I would like to have done that's more essential than going to the dentist. More essential than some other things going on. If we could take a survey on essentiality, whatever, if that's even a word, it's essential so much for everyone would be so different also based on gender, all the D&I space.
Yeah.
And so to me too, I feel like those are some of the temperatures that have to be taken. Do we all need a restaurant open? No. But do we all need a haircut? Yes. Do we all need this? No. But like, and not that there's a solid no, but where there's some bigger things, like, no, I don't need a dry cleaner so much, but I do need maybe my shoes fixed, or I need, like, now that you're not shopping as much, if you'd have less money, if, you're just being more mindful of things, more, so I just find, like, I'm just excited to see this is going to go. And Susan, I'll be following you. I want another.
Ditto.
I have to have you come speak to our lovely We Thrive group. Even.
I would love it. I would love it. But as I'm listening to you talk, I'm hearing the entrepreneur in you, and I think that individuals who have that entrepreneurial, even just a pioneering spirit or an adventurous spirit, in some ways are teed up a little bit more to navigate some of the twists and turns and the unexpected that happens every day. And as leaders, I think it's so important to think about the individuals that really need a more clearly paved way in order to move forward, and how we can all help contribute to that sort of thing, so that those of us who have that pioneering spirit, we're going to run ahead. We're going to chop some trees down, or not trees. We want to be mindful of the environment. Whatever's in the way, we're going to go through it, over it, around it, under it, whatever. And for those of us who need a little bit more security and a little bit more of terra firma, that we can all pitch in so that everyone, to your point, everyone gets a little bit of what they need, so we can all move forward together.
I think this is interesting as well, because as we think about the 38 million Americans that are unemployed as of last week, my mind goes back to 2007, 2008, when, many of us also lost jobs during that period of time too. And particularly for women, we reinvented and we pivoted and we changed in our careers. And many of us that were in the corporate sector for years and years, if not decades, then became, entrepreneurs or small business owners, and have had to make that mind shift. And now that we know that, women are overrepresented in every category in unemployment claims in every industry, that I'm sure that we'll see more of that happen even now, as women in particular rethink what does, everything from kind of the esoteric, like what is the meaning of life, to what is the meaning of my career, to like, how do I want to live life on a daily basis, right? Like all the micro versus macro levels. And I think it's interesting, Susan, and what you said around just the constant nature by which we're kind of changing right now too, where change didn't happen as quickly in the past, right? I mean, not that we have so much, as a measurement right now to gauge the present versus the past, but like this is a big moment in time right now.
Yeah.
And even Jodi, to what you were saying just around like the open workspaces, the open workspace philosophy evolved because as companies were trying to become more sustainable and wanting to be LEED certified, the open workspaces accommodated for that, enabled companies to think about using resources differently. And the original mindset was that it was going to foster more collaboration because we're all sitting next to each other and on top of each other. And, ultimately what happened was that, it's much like your experience is what many other Americans experienced as well, is that it wasn't as necessarily as productive because you weren't necessarily able to, we weren't socialized to be able to focus when there are millions of people around us. As we think about, even things like, the sharing economy and how that's going to shift. And so, how soon now we're going to want to like rent the runway and try on other people's clothes, or, get into an Uber or stay at an Airbnb, or what are the insurances that are going to need to be put in place in order for us to feel comfortable doing some of those things again. Now that would be considered extremely risky behaviors. Right. And I think that's going to constantly ebb and flow and change dramatically in the sense of how we all, quote unquote, go back, right, or go to whatever the new normal is. And having the entrepreneurial mindset, no matter if we're entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs working still in the corporate sense, like how can we ensure that we're staying innovative and staying flexible in our thought process, and also inspiring the next generation of leaders to come as well. Jodi, we had talked about, the work that your company does in mentoring and working with interns and your commitment to do that even now in a period of time where many companies aren't able to manage intern loads. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I think it's really important for us to talk about also
Yeah,
what
I mean,
inspire the next generation.
I think I was definitely Susan-esque in that tearing papers, where I know it's not my direct role in terms of the interns, and we have an EDGE program, which is our building of a pipeline, folks that are graduating seniors or graduating from grad school, whether or not an MBA, a master's in computer science or engineering. So I kept listening to what every time I heard a company say, oh, we're not having them, I'm like, please don't let that be our company. Then you hear someone else saying, oh, well, we'll be able to take these people, but not these. And I'm like, still, please, like a little kid, like waiting for Christmas or Hanukkah or greetings or Kwanzaa, just give me my gift. So the gift was the announcement that we are taking on it's either 86 interns and 75 of these pipeliners, or the 6 and the 5 switch. But we usually have on average about 200 interns, which includes this pipeline group, which is our EDGE program. And they are all going to be brought on virtually and onboarded remotely. And the EDGE program participants will start July 15th and be they are employees. It's like doing a management training program. So it's for 2 years, so they get extra training and coming up with the ways to really handle some stuff that you would do live, like team building and all of that, but really working hard with our L&D group. I'm getting to do a session on mentoring and, networking and the importance of your LinkedIn profile and how to connect outside of work, which I'm excited about. And then our interns will start next month, mid-June, same way. But their programs are a little shorter. We also have a partnership with Pencil, and we're still doing our internships there. We also have a partnership with Year Up, and we still have those folks in-house as well. So for us, this is the time of thriving versus, surviving, because we're about cyber. I mean, our stuff is what everyone's going to need, right? Cybersecurity, security, AI, all the infrastructure, app development, new ways of securing your funds, new ways of connecting with people. We're so secure that there's only 100 of us that actually can have a Zoom account. I'm happy to be one of them because of the security. I mean, in the beginning, you saw how, even if I had a business account for forever. Like I said, I've been doing this virtual thing for a minute, but they broke into mine because someone was not smart enough and put out what the actual Zoom stuff was, like not the invitation. So here I was about to teach a fitness class, and a whole bunch of stuff came across my screen where I was like, oh my God, So looking at what we do as people and what we're going to do as companies, and staying true where you can. We understand that a lot of small businesses and even large corporations, Susan brought up the whole higher education. If you lose half of the revenue from your students who can stay on campus, you're going to have to make up for it for more people signing in online. But does that also then become the new, I'll call it financial gaps, right? The disparities and the, inequities, where if you can afford to still send your kid to school because it's going to cost more now, or you can't, or is it a lottery? Like, then we're still building in some of the old stuff that I'm hoping we get rid of. In this case too, our company, our CEO was clear that, these kids and young people who are looking for these jobs, it's not just, it is to learn and to be a great citizen, and they love our company, but it was also to make some of that money, that they weren't just doing this for kicks and giggles either. And I felt like this was definitely a way to show that we're moving forward. It was, heartfelt when I also got a whole bunch of emails from students who decided to go somewhere else for the summer, who the somewhere else is not going through. And I'm like, I'm really sorry, but at this point, we can only have these commitments to these folks. But more companies are doing that. I still think that internships are still going to be alive and well. There's lots of industries. I'm sure, Susan, you've worked with enough of them. Everyone can use an intern.
Yep.
They will still be less expensive labor on the long term than actual, I don't want to hire Susan. I don't even want to know what she costs. However, I want mini Susan. I want Susie. Help me for a little while, get me to Susan, right? So I am hoping also in this entrepreneurial freelancer space, vendor space, that people become also a little bit more creative and open to that. And also things that have been hurting us as a worldwide global perspective of visas and where you can work. That's another part of what I'm hoping. This is what that heart or the evening the playing field, that if you are the most special computer scientist, AI person, and you live in Singapore, but you want to work in the US, but you don't have to come here anymore, but you could still work for us. And it doesn't require you to move, leave. Like, so there's some of those kind of stringent stuff that are part of the landscape currently of our workforce in the US and around the world. It's not just us. That I'm curious to see how that's going to go. And Susan, I'm happy you noticed that I have this, yes, entrepreneurial spirit. Like, although I work in corporate America, this job has never existed. The job I had at Merrill Lynch never existed before I got there. I applied for another job first, and it was just like, oh, that's a desk job. I don't want to do that. That's not. And then they called me back for something else. So any job that I've had, any 9 to 5, I've never replaced anyone. So I've always had to chart new waters. And it's always been work that it's like, I get called still for consulting stuff that no one has a solution. So I was like the Mikey, right? If no one else can figure it inside, I'll do it. She'll figure it out, even though she has no idea what we're talking about. So I do think that those people, us, are going to definitely be able to, ebb and flow, and who knows what's going to happen career-wise. But I am mostly concerned with folks that are used to the more traditional ways of working. And I always am curious, like, you really want to go back to the office? Like, you really, like, and I get it because I understand how they are as beings, but I also don't get it. Like, I'm also like, well, that's not happening for more than a minute. And even if it happens, you might not be essential enough to go back. Like, you might be part of that population that's going to be said, oh, you're just as productive, if not more, staying home. Right. So I'm just curious. But I do want to find work for all the people who are not working, because as tired as I am working and as busy as I am, one, I'd like to share the experience. Two, I feel like you're just better doing something. So even if it's not a direct pay or, kind of like all those other programs we've had in the past, you did something that was for a nonprofit, a part of your, tuition would be paid for, or those kind of things where we find other ways in a Starbucks-esque kind of fashion to pull more people back in sooner than later. But I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know who all of these people are.
And I think the rollout is going to be different too, because like we saw in 07, 08, the corporate sector got hit first, and then it rolled into the not-for-profit sector and lasted longer in the not-for-profit sector because the funding construct has changed.
Yep.
As of right now, 66% of not-for-profit organizations have had their mission delivery significantly compromised because of COVID. And so to your question earlier, Jodi, I was kind of thinking through like, oh yeah, why isn't that happening? And I think because the sector is just sort of figuring out what can we do, how can we deliver, because so much of mission delivery tends to be very high human touch. And I think that there's also a major scramble for how do we now recoup revenue. And there are a lot of organizations whose revenue, because of lost opportunities, generally like walks and galas and runs and climbs and those sorts of events that happen in the spring and happen in the fall. Any organization that's on a January 1st to December 31st fiscal year is sitting back saying, where's our revenue coming from? And how do we deliver on our mission? I think it's very complicated, and some of those ripple effects that we haven't actually fully thought through or experienced yet, just because there's so much going on day to day. More is really going to come to light. And I think interns are a great way for the not-for-profit sector, and some other folks that they'll start to lend their expertise in order to make sure that the sector doesn't sort of shrink a little bit too much and is able to thrive in the coming months and years.
This is a perfect place to end this conversation. I have so many more questions we didn't get to today. Would love to have you both back. This has been such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your insights and for your expertise. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you, everyone. We invite you to join us tomorrow for Workshop Wednesday, and make sure to check us out at joinmayshad.com for all of our upcoming programming and how you too could become a member of Mayshad Choice. Thank you so much. I'm Jan Mercer-Dahms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Mayshad. Thank you. Bye, everyone.